Myranda.
Thank you. All right. So I'm good to go?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. So if you do, so first of all, my name is Myranda Shirk. I am a senior data scientist and a lecturer at Vanderbilt University in our Department of Data Science. Super happy to be here with you. I was a participant in OceanHackWeek in 2021 or 2022, I believe, and had a wonderful time. It was also in Maine. I absolutely loved it. And I came back on the organizing committee and as a mentor for the next several years. And so I'm on the organizing committee now. And last year, I proposed this tutorial, which we had for the first time on AI-assisted programming. So I'm super excited to be sharing this with you. I hope it's helpful. I wish I was there in person with you. So to try to make this more interactive, if someone is raising their hand or, please just shout out, let me know. Or if someone has a question, feel free to just ask it. I know sometimes that can get a little bit weird in virtual room anyway, but my tutorial was just uploaded. So if you do a real nice git pull on the OHW tutorials repo, that would be great. And you should have it up. Feel free to follow along.
Hey, Myranda.
Yes.
Might you make your font a bit bigger?
This font?
Yes, please. Any
I
font?
might. Is that better?
Yeah, that's no.
Yeah.
No?
Okay. Well, got thumbs up. Should be good enough, big enough. Yeah.
All right, I made it even bigger. I wasn't convinced. Okay, so this is okay. And somehow there's a way to get rid of all this up at the top. Maybe. Maybe not. I always forget using different stuff all the time. Okay, so I think, yes.
The simple switch at the bottom.
Thank you. It actually was a switch called simple. I thought you were saying the switch was simple, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm offended now. Awesome. Okay, so if you do it, hopefully everyone is able to do a git pull and get this repo on there. You can also look at it on the OceanHackWeek tutorials under 2024 and Wednesday. So if you can't access it in your Jupyter Hub, you should have it there. You can also download it locally, however you want to do this. All right, so hopefully everyone had a chance to do that. Usually I look for nods in the room, but you all are so small on my screen that I can't tell. So I'm gonna forge on ahead unless people scream at me, and then I'll stop. All right, another chance where I usually look for nods. Okay, so anyway, like I said, I'm Myranda Shirk, senior data scientist and lecturer at Vanderbilt. And at Vanderbilt, we do a lot of stuff with generative AI and large language models. And one of the areas we've been focusing on is we call it AI-assisted programming. And so my little spiel intro to this is, OceanHackWeek, we have a really, really solid framework. I love the idea of everyone getting together, whether or not you have coding background, and hacking out a project, and they're actually very useful. We have a lot of projects that go on to continue to be used in other people's projects as a legacy, and I think that's wonderful. If you have participated in a hackathon before, though, you may know that maybe it involves more debugging than coding, or more debugging than actual project work. And so a lot of the times this process is writing your code as fast as humanly possible, and then running into errors that you don't know what they mean, and then spending hours fixing those errors. And then a lot of times project teams will find that you spend more time chasing those errors than you actually are focusing on the science. And maybe in the last hour before you're supposed to present your project, you're finally fixing an error. Everyone has experienced this. But this workflow has absolutely changed with the start of AI. I think yours might say 2023 on here. I have updated, I just forgot to update the little date. But I say this workflow is about to change last year. It has changed this year. In a year, we have seen how AI can be used for coding. I think maybe a year ago, not a ton of people used this workflow. I imagine now there's probably several of you who have asked ChatGPT for help at some point. And if you haven't, then we will get hands-on experience doing that together. But large language models have an incredible ability to write, read, and even debug code. And so we've kind of shifted at Vanderbilt and I think worldwide to an AI-assisted programming workflow. And even within the university level, it allows you to spend more time planning the purpose of your code, almost more that software engineering side, while allowing a large language model to actually do the sad work of going through error messages. I think one of my favorite stories about something like this is, and you can click on this article if you want. Ugh, you can click on this article if you want. But we had a professor, I think she was actually a postdoc at the time, come in to one of our data science workshops. She's a biology professor, never coded before, maybe had seen a little bit of Python, attended one of our AI-assisted programming workshops 2 summers ago. 4 hours later, had a birdsong identification app using ChatGPT to help her write this code. I think that's an amazing showcase of what we could do now and allowing scientists to focus on science. And even if they haven't coded, talking through a large language model to help them achieve what they want. I think that's so cool and definitely fits within our scope here at OceanHackWeek. All right, so but what even are these models? What am I talking about? So I'm usually talking about LLMs, which stands for large language models. And I always like to have a section like this because to use these models, it's very important to understand what they are and what they were trained for. Because there's a lot of things that they weren't trained for that people are trying to get them to do and then complaining that they do them wrong. So let's talk about how they were made, why they were made, and then how we actually get these results. So when I'm talking about LLMs or I'm talking about AI, I'm usually talking about generative AI. It's the generative is that G in ChatGPT, and this means that the model is trained to generate text. The name makes sense. And how it's actually doing this is by predicting the next most probable word. Technically, it's called a token because it can be part of word, but anyway, I'm going to say word. It's predicting that next most probable word. So it's not exactly trained to do some certain task, but it's trained to predict that next most probable word. So it's sounding very human. And what we did, not me, what ChatGPT did and all these other models did is they fed it a bunch of free text available on the internet. So you can imagine like Wikipedia, and the models learned to predict the next word from all of these articles and thus sound more human. And so they really got a sense for writing styles. They got a sense for some subjects, like a broad subject area, not really anything too specific. They got a sense for, how to write, how to convincingly sound like a person writing. So this is why we can kind of talk back and forth with them, because if someone asks you a question, says, oh, how do I cook a grilled cheese? You're probably going to say, oh, you get some bread and cheese and do that. Or you say, I don't know, if you don't know how to make a grilled cheese. But anyway, that's why you can ask these models questions and they respond to you and it sounds like they're a human. It's because they've been trained on all of this data and they learn that when someone asks a question, usually you give a response. And there's been a bunch of other stuff during that training that kind of hones in on not being rude because it was trained on the internet and maybe there are some rude people on the internet. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. But so anyway, mostly this model is trained to generate text. So we need to keep this in mind. Its number one job is generating text regardless of factual correctness. It's not been trained, most of the models, some models have, most of the models that we use, like ChatGPT, have not been trained on factual correctness. This is where some people get into some muddy water here, is they're trying to ask, scientific questions or medical questions. And these models have been trained to talk about subjects, so they will talk very convincingly at you, but it is not factually correct. So generating text, that's what we're at here. So with that in mind, let's look at some of these tools that are available. And there's more being developed each week, so this becomes outdated constantly. But this week, I'm going to talk about some of the 3 main models that I like and that I think are the most popular and what you would probably be able to use for your projects here in OceanHackWeek. Of course, there's ChatGPT. It's our little darling of the AI world, probably the most well-known. And it gets a lot of use. People are writing emails with it, and I've heard maybe some rumors that students are writing essays with them. I don't know. I don't assign essays in my class. And it's very useful. It's widely used. It does cost money, but it has a nice, I think this says free trial, but I think it's actually a free tier now. I don't know. My work pays for mine, so I don't have to worry about that. But you can just go to chatgpt.com and sign up. I'm gonna be using this, so if you want to follow along, you can sign up for that. There is a free tier, and you should be able to access it just like I'm accessing it. Their models change a lot. Right now, it's GPT-4 and GPT-4o. This is very exciting because GPT-4o is a relatively recent release. I think maybe this summer it was released. It's their most recent model. It offers better performance. It's available on the free tier. You can upload more information to it. It's supposedly better at coding and also speaking other not as common languages, which then some people are like, why do I even need to pay for it if this is free? I don't know. So anyway, GPT-4o is the one that I recommend for today, but we'll talk about some other ones you can use, and I'm interested to see if you use other models, how your results may vary. So just some quick facts about it. It does cost money, but it's cents per request, unless you're paying some sort of subscription. If you're using it, you can use them in the API as well. So in code, it's really not that expensive. But no updated knowledge past 2023. Don't try to ask it about recent events. It will not know, it will not have encountered any information like that. It's also not able to access the internet. A lot of people think that when you're asking ChatGPT, it's the same as Googling, but it is not. ChatGPT has a knowledge cutoff, doesn't know about anything past 2023, and it's not going to be able to look it up for you. But it's really good at generating code. It has specifically been trained on Python, on predicting that next word in Python, so it's really good at writing that. So in this tutorial, I'll be using GPT-4o through this ChatGPT interface, but like I said, I'll talk about some other ones. Okay, let's talk about Bing. Very similar model to ChatGPT. They both use a GPT model, but it can also use the web search to aid its responses. Microsoft made a smart business decision by requiring that you can only access this in the Edge browser. So go ahead and get the Edge browser out of your recycling bin and re-download it and then use it to access Bing. You may have to remember how to access Bing. I don't know, they really tried to bring it back and make it relevant again. It's pretty good though, and it's completely free to use because they would practically pay you to use the Edge browser. And it can access the web for answers. So when you ask it a question, it will also do a little search on there for your query and then kind of compile it back and give you a summary. So it does have that bonus where it can access the web, kind of get some more relevant or newer information. Some people do like to use this, and I encourage you, if you don't have a ChatGPT account or you don't feel like setting up any account, all you've got to do is use the Edge browser and you can access Bing GPT. Pretty cool. I really like to rag on Edge and Bing because it's, that's what you do. But one time I was at a conference and I gave this talk like back in January, and I didn't realize that like Microsoft was there. And so then we're doing the conference thing where you're like talking to people afterwards, and many people that I was talking to were like, oh, what do you do? And they're like, oh, I'm a data engineer at Microsoft. And I was like, oh, use Edge? Do they use Edge too? So anyway, they should be able to take it, right? They should. Anyway, so hopefully no spies from Microsoft are here today. If you are, I apologize. Anyway, Bing GPT. And then the next one is a little different from the others. I love this one. It's called Perplexity. This is an AI search engine. I think one of the first of its kind, or at least one of the first that does it really well. Uses a model called Claude, which is a form of GPT. But it's actually a search engine, and it will search your question on the internet. It kind of Googles your question for you. But then what it does that's really useful is it compiles all of the sources and generates a response summarizing each thing that it found. And then it will actually give you a link to each web page that it found it on. So this is beautiful for things like, how do I do something? Like very specific, like if it's something like a very specific code bug that maybe ChatGPT doesn't know about, or it's very package specific, you can ask Perplexity and it will go through all of the websites, maybe all of the forums like Stack Overflow and stuff for you, and then kind of compile its answers and it'd be like, this person said that this worked, and then give you the link to that. And it's like, but other people are saying if you update blah, 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 and give you a link to whatever webpage said that. That's great for stuff where you might spend hours Googling or some sort of process, very specific process that you need. I would say don't rely on this for generating your code. It's not that great because, like I said, it's compiling information it gets from Google basically, and you'll get all kinds of weird code from it. It's not meant to generate code, but it is really good if you are searching for something kind of niche that you would go through multiple, maybe forums to find out how to do. So for instance, I had to do something with my car the other day, and instead of going through all of these YouTube videos to figure out how to do this thing with my car, I could ask Perplexity and it's like, oh, this tutorial thing says to do this, and here's the video that you should watch to figure out how to do it. So anyway, saves you some time on stuff like that. As far as coding, like I said, I would recommend it if you have a very specific, like maybe a package updated that you didn't know about or something. That happened to me a couple of nights ago. So not great at generating code, but kind of good for figuring out some information about code or about a package. And it's got a free and a paid version. Okay, so these are the three main tools that I see people use. Other ones, we've got GitHub Copilot. This is great. It's available as a plugin for VS Code if anyone uses that. And it basically is a very smart code assistant. I use it all the time. My coworkers use it all the time. It is wonderful at writing code for you. You can type a comment into your code saying like, I want to write a function that does this, and then like the code will appear below it. It's wonderful. It's magical. I love it. Google Gemini. This used to be called Google Bard. Google Gemini, also a really good model. You can sign up for it. It's available through Google. Just your Google account. And then Poe, this is by Anthropic, which was a spinoff of ChatGPT when some people decided they wanted a more ethics-guided AI company. So they created Anthropic, which created the website Poe. This has multiple chat models that are more ethically guided if you like that. One downside of these models is that if you're trying to generate something that looks offensive, you probably won't run into this, but we've had projects on social justice, for instance, that are looking at we had a project at Vanderbilt where they were interviewing people about gun violence and their experience with gun violence. And we tried to analyze some of these questions through the models on Poe, and they refused to because we were talking about gun violence and there's a risk of promoting gun violence. It wouldn't generate anything about it. So you probably won't run into anything like that during OceanHackWeek, but just a little note there. Really good to have ethics guided bots. I'm all for it, but it's kind of a little too strict sometimes. All right, so any questions about these models before I move on? Does anyone have questions about anything? All right. Asking for questions gives me a chance to drink water. Okay, so the next part, until we actually get to working with the AI, I also like to introduce this thing called prompt engineering. These AI tools are only as useful as you make them. And it's important to know what the models can do and what they cannot do well. And then also construct your prompt in a way that makes sense. think about giving a person instructions. Say you have some sort of assistant. Maybe your assistant is like a little bit dumb. You want to make sure that you give your assistant the instructions they need to do what you want. You want to give them plenty of instructions. A lot of people try to use these AIs and say, generate me this graph. And they're like, that graph doesn't look right. AI is stupid. And well, you gave it very, very broad instructions. It did what you wanted it to do. You need to hone in what you're asking it to do to get something very specific, right? So we have a couple different strategies, and they sound a little funny. Prompt engineering is all about getting the AI to do what you want. My favorite one is called this persona prompt, where you tell the model to act like some persona, and then it will answer accordingly. It's kind of like hypnosis. It's really creepy. You can say, like, you are a doctor. Tell me this medical advice. And now I think ChatGPT will be like, actually, I'm not a doctor. But in the past, ChatGPT would be like, oh, okay, I'm a doctor. Here's my medical advice for you. And it would actually be a lot better than just asking it straight out for some medical information. The reason it's doing this, if you want to know the science behind it, is that, like I said, it was trained on all of the internet, basically. So if you imagine, someone, say, introducing themselves as a professor or as a programmer or as a doctor, and then giving much more specific and accurate information is kind of the reason why it's able to do this. So you tell the model, you are a programmer. I need you to write a function that does this. You are a scientist. I'm trying to design this study. How should I do this? It will start responding like that persona pretty well. I think it's really fun. I like to pretend that I'm hypnotizing the AI into doing what I want. A couple other things that you can do with prompt engineering. You can give it an example of the output that you want. So if you're trying to write a function and you're like, here's my input, here's what I want it to output, here's an example of this, here's an example of exactly what I want. That's a really great way to reason with these models. We also have one that I specifically like, we call it flipped interaction. This is where you tell the model what you want to do and you say, ask me questions until you have enough information to do this. So my favorite use of this is for something with AWS. So if you're building some sort of app on Amazon Web Services, their documentation is crazy. It takes hours to look through. So what I like to do is to tell the model, I want to build a website on AWS that does this. Ask me questions until you have enough information to build it for me. And the AI will say, oh, okay, well, how much money are you paying on AWS? Like, what tier do you have? And then the model will say, what exactly do you want your website to do? Do you need data storage? Do you need this kind of connection? And it will go through and ask me all these questions until it's like, okay, here's your app. I asked you all the questions that I needed to know. This is, really great for a more complex task that you're like, I actually have no idea how to do this, and asking how to do it will be too much information. So just take it one step at a time with this flipped interaction. Really great. And if you want to know even more about prompt engineering, I have this paper here that many of my coworkers are co-authors on all of these different strategies for prompt engineering. So like I said, garbage in, garbage out, you hear a lot. It's really true with these AI models. People like to show, oh, how stupid these AI models are. No way AI is going to take over the world because they don't do what I want. And I'm like, well, they could take over the world. You just have to engineer your prompt correctly. So maybe one of you can be the cause for the singularity if you get your prompt right. All right. Eventually, we're going to use these AI models. Eventually. Let's talk about that workflow before we do. So this workflow, when you are working with these models, first, prompt engineer your question specifically for coding. For whatever project you're working on, prompt engineer your question. Give feedback if the answer that the model gives you is not what you want. You can even give the model details on the project. You can give it documentation of a package, depending on the model and how much context length it has, how much information it can ingest at once. You can just like download some portion of NumPy documentation and then just give it to it and be like, hey, I need you to use this. And then sometimes it'll be better an example of what you want. You can even give it an error message and say, hey, I'm getting this error message when I run your code. What is this? So prompt engineer, give feedback if it's not the answer that you want. Run the code, send any errors to the model. Rinse and repeat. As you go through this cycle, hopefully you end up with some working code, and then you can move on with your life. So this is really meant to speed up your workflow and move on to your next task. Design what you want your code to do. Let the AI help you get there. Test it out, and then move on. So hopefully you can now stop cursing over all of the documentation, all of the data access documentation that you're maybe going through, and get your work done faster. So that's my little spiel on AI assisted workflow. Now we can actually move to the demo portion of this. And this, I am actually going to be coming up with a new project and working on it with you all together. Feel free to follow along in your own notebook. I would actually love that because I love to know if your answers differ from mine. They probably will, especially if you're using a different model. And I would love to know, what the model suggested to you, if the code it gave you was better or worse, or maybe you just went in a completely different direction altogether. So if you haven't already, go ahead and sign up for ChatGPT. You can use the free tier for sure. Just be aware if you're using the free tier, there's a cap on the number of questions that you can ask. So don't go crazy during this tutorial or you may reach that cap. Or use Edge or Google Gemini, whichever model really speaks to you or is easy for you to access. Okay, hopefully everyone has had time to do that. Just giving a couple seconds to make sure people can have those websites up. So you're welcome to try the LLM of your choice. And I'd love to know if you get some different answers. Just remember that this AI-assisted workflow, if your answers look completely different from mine, and if you get stuck or there's technical difficulties, I did document the entire process beforehand with screenshots. Screenshots are great for live coding because something will always go wrong. So we can default back on these screenshots at the end of the notebook if you want to know what a different coding session that wasn't in front of an audience looked like, because whenever there's an audience, the code likes to behave different. Okay, let's get started. So first I needed to establish a goal for my demonstration, and actually in line with this theme, I asked ChatGPT to do this for me. So I told ChatGPT I am demonstrating an oceanography project for a hackathon, use machine learning and data visualization to demonstrate an ocean science concept using data such as Argo floats or NOAA oceans data, come up with the data and project goal that I should present. And ChatGPT is very polite. It said, that sounds like a fantastic opportunity. And I said, thank you for validating me. And it told me, it gave me a couple of options for projects, but this one I really liked, which was predictive modeling of sea surface temperature with Argo float data. Gave me a little spiel about the data I could use, my project goal, and some additional information. So I said, this sounds great. I'm going to run with it. So our goal today all together is to develop a model to predict sea surface temperature using Argo float data. All right, project ideation done. Okay, so the next part, the next step in our project needs to be accessing this data, right? Maybe we don't know anything about how to access this data. Let's see if ChatGPT can help us. So I put a little suggested prompt here. Feel free to change it up if you would like. I'm actually going to split my screen here so that we can look at both the notebook and ChatGPT at the same time. All right, no one look at my history. It's okay. Okay, so hopefully you're able to see it looks like you're able to see both of my screens. So I've got this notebook on the left, and I'm going to be working with ChatGPT on the right. If at any point you're just not able to see it very clearly, someone shout at me and I will stop doing this. I'm going to zoom in on ChatGPT. Just shout at me and I will just change back to one window, but I think this is nice so that I'm not giving anyone nausea by switching back and forth between tabs. Okay, so let's just take this prompt. Just take that prompt and put it into ChatGPT. So you do get better information if you tell it what you're wanting to do. So I'm actually going to include a little bit of information about my project here. I'm going to say, I'm developing a project on predicting sea surface temperature using Argo float data in Python. How do I access Argo float sea surface temperature data in Python? Okay. And they have up it has updated like I said, if you want to select your model, you can select them here. I'm using GPT-4o. Let's do this. Okay, there it is. It came back. So it's going to give us a bunch of stuff. And it not only gives us the code, but it also gives us some explanations in what we actually need for our code. And I just realized I haven't connected to a kernel. Oh, maybe I have. Okay. So it's saying make sure you have ArgoPy. We should have ArgoPy on the server. And then saying, okay, now you're going to need to import these necessary modules. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and make sure that this works. All right. And now it says, okay, here's how you fetch Argo data. I highly recommend reading through everything that it gives us. I'm not going to spend a ton of time doing that just because I don't want to waste all of your time by like making sure I understand everything ChatGPT is saying to me. But it gives you little descriptions that are really helpful, especially if you're not familiar with programming. For those that don't have as much Python experience, I highly recommend you need to understand what ChatGPT is giving you. Ask it questions about the code. Don't just take the code and run with it. Make sure it makes sense to you, because I do find that this workflow works really well for people who already know how to code. For people that are not as familiar with coding, it can kind of be a little more confusing, or it at least brings out the, I don't want to say laziness, but kind of like, just to copy and paste and not read. Make sure you're reading this code and understanding what it's giving you. So this gave us a little suggestion here. It said, okay, you can use the Argo data fetcher, get the Argo loader by region, and we can copy that. All right. I don't know what POTM. Oh, it seems to think POTM. Ooh, and now we get an error. This is why I love live coding. But luckily I can show you how we can do this. Okay, box must be a list with 6 or 8 elements. Okay, so if you're not sure what that, I think I know how to fix that. But if you're not sure what that means, you can even say, when I run the data loading code, I get this error. I'm curious if anyone got code that didn't result in an error this first time. Okie doke, awesome. And so I am actually going to, if you scroll down to the bottom of the notebook, I have some region saved. Yeah, I have this region saved just because I looked at a map and chose this region, because otherwise we would take a little bit of time trying to figure out what region we wanted. But theoretically, if you are working on a project, you probably know the region that you want to look at. All right, so I'm going to run this instead. So all I did, if you go down to the bottom of the notebook, you can fetch this code here, this list. and put that in as your region. So we're going to wait a little bit. And hope that it gets that code for us. It's kind of interesting. Before, I don't know if you can see, it did not, it selected SST as the name here. And I'm kind of interested in why now it's called POTM. So I'm a data scientist. So if a more oceans person knows the answer to this, feel free to inform me. And just to check, Alex, am I supposed to be on this kernel or a different kernel?
That'll do.
That'll do? Okay,
They're the
timeout
same
error.
in this case.
Timeout error. Interesting. Interesting. So you can go through and debug this with ChatGPT. Towards the bottom here, I know that this, let's see if this one will do the trick for us. Something exciting about running this tutorial is that something different happens every time. Like this. I've never seen that before. I think these are future warning, future warning, future warning. So it should be okay. So if I run dataset, it does have that dataset for us. Okay. So we know that this code works for sure. This is what ChatGPT generated me last time. So, you know, if something doesn't work quite right, you can say, you can ask it questions about it. You can say, generate another version of this code. So in this case, I can say, well, I'd like to access the region, the SST data at the region here, rewrite the code to account for this. And sometimes if you just ask it to rewrite the code, then you can get kind of a better answer. Like I said, it's a little bit of a process. And then now it even says, okay, and here's how you can plot it. Okay, so I checked, we did in fact get a data set. Oh, sorry for all the scrolling. I try not to do that too fast. Okay, so we have our data set here. All right. So now we want to do some sort of visualization. I think I went ahead and said plot it on a map. Oh, and then I have this plot as well. Okay, so let's ask ChatGPT if it's able to help us plot this on a map. So let's say, how can I visualize this data on a map? Because maps are really fun. For me, plotting is one really great way that I use ASS programming for, because there's so many things in plotting that you can do. And I kind of hate it sometimes. I hate how many options there are. So it tells us, all right, you need car2py and you need matplotlib, and you can do all of this. Notice that here, it's actually just starting from the beginning and just modifying the code that we have currently. So we already got our data. I think I maybe didn't get the SST data here specifically. Dimensions. Okay, so maybe we just need this down here. Always watch out for the names of variables, because it used to be a little better at keeping your variable names all of the same, but for some reason does not always do that. And don't forget your import statements, very important. Very important. Okay. And I believed I called this, I'm just gonna put data equals that data set that we made. Hopefully that will work. Okay, So now I have copied this code here, and oh no. Yeah, so it's saying POTM, and I don't think it's supposed to be POTM. Does anyone know what it's? I think it's just SST. I'm gonna go down here and check. Man, ChatGPT not proving my point today. Should be temp, perhaps. Let's see. POTM gives a key error. If you're encountering a key error, check your data set, blah, blah, blah. And then select the correct one. Okay. Yeah, so it usually is temp. That's interesting that it gave us POTM this time, but like I said, with a quick question, you can ask it why it's doing that and then try to change it. All right, trying to scroll slowly so that you don't get sick. All right, so let's go back up to our code and find where it got, right. So it's probably temp, and we could check that ourselves if we want. Oh, another error. Levels. Man, y'all are getting an immersive experience today. Immersive experience. Okay, I'm going to try one more time to put that through, and then if not, I'm going to switch over to our screenshots so that I don't bore you all with this live debugging. Or maybe it's immersive. All right, so I'm just putting in, now I get the error. This, and sometimes it's pretty good at this. Okay, so it says, inspect that, and then change it accordingly. I don't even see personally where it's saying, oh, yeah, here we go, selecting the levels. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so it looks like this is what's going to fix it. It, if you're wondering where I got that from, it was from that little description. I just read it really fast. So we're gonna give it one more try. Oh, we got a map. We got a map. So this is actually in line, a little bit in line with what I got the first time I tried to do this. It gave me a map, and then it was really zoomed in, so I couldn't see any of the points. So then I said, this map is super zoomed in, and I can't see the data points. How do I zoom out or make the map, make the data points within frame? Another way that I really like to use the plotting, AI assisted coding with plotting. And so it gives us a very long explanation of, we can say set extent, we can zoom out, and it gives us some modified code on this. And we can watch as it makes this. Okay, so I'm just going to take the plotting portion of this code and find where we start plotting. And see if that helps us. So let's run this again. Did not, in fact, help. I'm curious, did anyone get a map that looks a little better? So for instance, at the bottom, this is the map that I got. Did anyone get any code that produced that?
Yeah, but I use Cloud, not ChatGPT.
Use Claude?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I used the Python version of ChatGPT and did get a map. It doesn't look
You
like
used
that.
what?
I used a kind of like a Python GPT or version in ChatGPT and did get a map. It did
Oh,
give me like a number, a specific number for the Argo float instead of like putting up the region.
yeah.
It looks like your first initial map, but it has the points.
Oh, okay. Okay. Interesting. So yeah, you can kind of see the variability. Sometimes I do this and it goes super smoothly, and then sometimes it's like, I actually don't want to do anything. If you run into that, I do sometimes find that ChatGPT 4, it is their legacy model, but sometimes I find it's a little more stable. I think you do have to pay for that one. So I was hoping to do everything with this. But we can see if maybe GPT-4 gives us some better answers sometimes. Okay, yeah, interesting. I'm gonna try to run this data fetcher again and make sure that I do have the data, in fact. Could also be those warnings that I'm just completely ignoring. Oh, and it ran, and yep, that's our map. Okay. Interesting. So you may have to play around with the mapping part. I believe if you want to see, like I said, the screenshots of what I did, or if you have a friend next to you who did get a nice map, maybe you can compare code there. So I'm actually going to start, what should I do? I think I might start from these screenshots so that you can see what it did give me. For some reason, GPT-4o is acting up. Maybe not the best advertisement for AI assisted programming, but I promise if you do spend some time, it does help you debug. Because I just want you to imagine for a second, if I wasn't using AI assisted programming, running into all of these errors live, or maybe even not during a presentation, just sitting on my own at a desk, this kind of stuff could take hours. So you at least do have a little chat assistant friend that tells you how to do things maybe. But sometimes they're a little dumb. So, all right, let me make sure I have all of this running. Ran that. Okay. And the first plot that it actually gave me was like, oh, you can plot this if you wanted. I said, okay. I asked if I could plot it on a map. And it gave me some nice code for extracting the sea surface temperature data and then creating our little map plot. And here's an example of that map that it gave me. It even color coded some of them, which is super nice. And in this one is that example that I told you about where I said, oh, it's a little too zoomed in. How do I zoom it out? And it gave me a little example of how I could zoom out, how I could modify my code here. And then when I run this one, it zooms way out. So it kind of took my suggestion to the extreme. But nice to see where we were in the world with this sea surface temperature data set. Okay, and then trying to get a little more oceanographer-y, I asked it for the SST and salinity graph that is classic. I do believe it, let's see. Oh, I don't think I ran this stuff before that key error temp. We already had SST up here. Okay, that's because I didn't run a thing. And it helped me create a scatter plot. It says, okay, now you can use matplotlib to create this little scatter plot here. And I believe last time I did this, someone told me it is upside down. It's supposed to be flipped. Like I said, I'm not an oceanographer. So if it's flipped, you could just tell it, say, hey, I need to flip this around. So just a little thing to point out if you're not a subject area expert, things can get a little wacky and you want to kind of ground yourself and make sure that you have the right information for that. So it gave me some code to make this little plot here. And now we get to the interesting part. And I actually am going to go back to ChatGPT at this point because it is pretty good at doing this. And this is kind of the bulk of what you're wanting to do with your code. So if you're wanting to follow the screenshots, I'm on this predicting part, but I'm actually going to hop back up to our code because I'm pretty confident, and, you know, famous last words, I'm pretty confident that ChatGPT is able to consistently make good machine learning code. Okay. So a little bit on the plotting. If you want to try to troubleshoot that with me or a friend later, I would be happy to do it. I just don't want to bore everyone with my mapping troubleshoots. Okay, so now we can reach the actual goal of our project, which is predicting the sea surface temperature using these variables such as pressure, salinity, longitude, latitude. So I've developed this little prompt here. Feel free to change it around if you want. And so basically we're asking, I want to use a machine learning model to predict sea surface temperature using other variables. How can I do this? Using the Python code generated above. And notice I spelled variables wrong, and it's even able to get that. It's okay with that. Okay, so it's going to tell us how we can get some sort of machine learning model for our project. Tells us to prepare our data and all of this. And it says, all right, here's all the libraries you need. Make sure you get your data. Now it's creating a data frame for us, telling us which ones to drop and everything, splitting our data into training and test sets, and then training that machine learning model. Okay, so let us start on that. So I'm going to go ahead and import these libraries. Decided to import a lot of libraries. All right, we've already got our data. I got the latitude, longitude. I don't think I got the pressure data. So I'm going to go ahead and copy everything from down here. As well as pandas. And I don't remember importing, oh, yep, pandas is right there. So I'm going to add a cell here with this. And here we go. It went ahead and got all of these values for us and then put them into a very nice pandas data frame for us. This is another thing, creating a data frame that can sometimes take hours if you're not super familiar with what you're doing or super familiar with the data you're working with or just with pandas in general. So look at how long that took us. It took us about 2 seconds. Very exciting. Okay, and now it's going to tell us exactly how we can split into training and test sets. You know, in the middle of this, even if you're like, oh, why do I split data into training and test sets? Or what exactly does this do? These are all great extension questions that you can ask as you're going along. So if we go ahead and run this, seem to run without errors. We have our training and test set. And now we can get to the actual training of a machine learning model. So it looks like it shows a random forest regressor as an example, gave us number of estimators, set the random state. So let's see. Oh, and there we go. And it even tells us how we can make predictions from this. And that looks pretty good. Even gave us a little graph on how we did. So stuff like that, really great, especially if you want to get started in machine learning. I think machine learning tends to be one of the learning curves that takes people a little while to get over. So if you're just starting out in machine learning or you want to learn about other models you can use, it's really great for that. And then it even says we can visualize our predictions on a map. I have to say, ChatGPT, I'm not super confident in you currently for making maps, but let's see what it does here. Yeah, still not great. So it's mapping ability. It needs some coffee this morning. I think maybe it doesn't know where it is on a map right now. But maybe we can play around with that, huh? Oh, I thought someone had a question. All right, so maybe use ChatGPT certainly for machine learning, occasionally for maps. Set aside some extra time for maps. Set aside some extra time for maps. Okay, and it also gives us a little explanation about, you know, oh, this provides a complete pipeline, blah, blah, blah. So really great information here. I'm skipping over it because I don't want to read to you. This is not a reading session. I don't want to read to you, but I do recommend that you read it as you go along with this. Okay, so that's pretty incredible what we did just now. I don't know if you saw, we loaded some data almost pain-free loaded some data, which is big. I used to work at, so part of my intro, I should have said this. I used to work at NOAA, at NCI, the National Centers for Environmental Information, was in charge of our data archive and data access. And I know firsthand how frustrating it is to access data. And we're working on it, okay? Or they're working on it, I'm not there anymore. They're working on it, okay? But it's just a little difficult to access data sometimes. This is a really great tool for us to access data. So anyway, we accessed our data. We plotted our data. We halfway plotted it on a map. All right, we're gonna count that as mostly a win because we got an image, which is more than I could do in 5 minutes by myself, probably. We created a random forest model from nothing. We just made a model and then we fit that model. And now we have a graph of how our model did. So we did all of these things in the span of however long we've been talking together. I think 30 minutes since I started the actual coding portion of this. So think about what you were trying to do in your projects, how long it took you, how many errors you came up against, and then think about maybe this workflow and how it could help you speed up. So even with that little hump with maps, we'll forgive it. We'll forgive it. We'll forgive it. All right, so not framing this on my fridge, but okay, so, you know, time permitting, which I don't think we have time permitting, you can try to extend this example. I do encourage that. It's a lot of fun to play around with, especially when people aren't watching you. Try to extend this example, you know, ask it for a more complex model. I know I did this. I don't remember if I included it in the screenshots below, but I asked it, hey, what's a more complex model that I could use, like a neural network? How do I use that? How can I improve model performance? Or even add in additional data? And, you know, I'd be really interested in hearing if you try this. I would love to know what results you got. So go ahead and extend this example if you're interested at some point. And I include this little playground session so that you can, you know, try the AI assisted workflow on your own project or your own interests. You've got, you know, a couple cells there if you want to play around with it. And of course, if you were just a little bit lost or you want to see a concrete example of how I used this exactly that you can read through on your own, I do include the demo via screenshots right here, as well as all of the code that I used to run it and what those were like. So I hope that was useful to you. I think it's really impressive the amount you're able to get done and then move on and perhaps extend your projects past what you even thought was possible within the portion of a hackathon. I think this is going to change how we build apps in general, but especially at hackathons, at hack weeks like this, it really ups the pace and ups the amount of work you're able to do here. So that concludes my portion of the talk. I'm interested in hearing from you now. I think we're going to talk, maybe have some sort of talking session about maybe the downfalls of using AI or your own experiences with using AI. But please do let me know if you got different results from me that were interesting or just something you'd like to share. So that concludes my portion of it. Thank you so much. Great to see all of your faces on my computer screen. And I hope this was useful to you in your projects.
Thank you. So we have the next 30 minutes blocked out for discussion of using AI. So anyone has any thoughts to lead off with? Anyone have experience before this using? Yeah. How you guys done it?
Yeah, I'm pretty new to coding, so I've relied pretty heavily on ChatGPT, I'd say, for coding stuff. And I actually had a question about kind of just if there's any rule of thumb for how much data you should be providing ChatGPT with, because so my experience with ChatGPT, I was interning at NOAA this summer, and we were like using ChatGPT to write some of our data analysis code. And my mentor was just kind of being cautious about like how much we were telling it about what we were doing. And so I was just wondering like if there is any kind of, you know, stuff to keep in mind when you're talking to ChatGPT about like what information you should be providing it about your project or your intentions, or if anyone else has thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I actually was, as a former NOAA employee, was really surprised to hear you say that you were using it for a NOAA project, because they are pretty strict about that. I know they, since I have left, they have tried to use more tools like that, but really interesting that you were able to use it. So data security, data privacy. When you're using ChatGPT, you are essentially sending them everything that you say. You're sending that to a company. You're sending that to ChatGPT. Sam Altman is reading it personally, probably not. But you are sending them whatever you're working on, right? And so, especially in terms of federal data, federal government, yeah, you really have to be careful with what you're sending. I know a lot of agencies just say, we don't use it because we don't want to do that. There are some alternatives though. I would suggest using an open source model. So Llama 3 just came out, already outperforming GPT-4, and it is completely open source, which means that you can run it on your own computer. I mean, you do have to have a more powerful computer, but you can run it on your own computer, and that data stays within your own space. So if you have confidential information, you should not share it. Applies also in the realms of teaching student data. So we, have laws against sharing student data. Don't send like your students' quizzes to ChatGPT and then say, hey, grade this quiz for me, because that's illegal. So stuff like that, you really have to be careful with. As far as, like what we were doing, we were trying to, and I think with OceanHackWeek in general as well, all of these are open source projects. They mostly should be totally fine to share information. But if that really creeps you out to give your information to ChatGPT, you can use an open source alternative like Llama.
Yes. Who actually reads privacy policies? Who just clicks through them? Yeah. This is a time to not click through them to see how they're using this data, especially if it's not truly yours to share. For GMRI, our tech department has asked us if we're using any tools with ChatGPT or other large language model, text generation type tools built into them, to run them by the IT team first, and they go and read the privacy policy for us. But generally they want to see that the company is not planning on keeping the data directly. They may be keeping some metadata about like queries and like how many times do we say that there was an error and please fix this. That kind of stuff is usually okay, but yeah, they don't want our exact prompts. So one of the ones that they've signed off on for us is source graph coding, which uses a bunch of different models behind the scenes, but all the models they use behind the scenes, source graph has gotten them to agree with the privacy policy that they're not going to hold the data, and it can use a local model like Llama.
Yeah, and there are enterprise versions of a lot of these models as well. So I'm pretty sure Vanderbilt has, and when I say enterprise, that just means like whatever data you send stays locally. So I'm pretty sure Vanderbilt, for example, has an enterprise version of ChatGPT where our queries are not going back to ChatGPT, they're staying within the organization. So a lot of these tools will also have enterprise versions, but then that has to be on your company level. So like a company approved thing where they actually set up a contract that they're not sharing data and stuff. So as far as, federal government goes, maybe that will happen eventually.
Often that's where the line between free and paid is, that as an individual you can pay and they say give you controls on your data, whereas free, part of the freedom is that you are giving them your data to continue training on and making the tools better.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. And I have a question. How much do you recommend to use for example, AI tools in coding? Since I feel that if you use it from beginning of your coding, it makes me a little lazy in, for example, being creative and innovative in coding. And I want to know that how much do you recommend to use AI in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I do find, and I think we talked about this a little bit last year as well, the consensus seems to be that it makes, if you have a tendency to be lazy, it makes you lazier. And I wish I want to have a different term other than lazy, because I don't think that's a great descriptor for people. Obviously, if you're doing a project like this, you're not lazy. But if you are tempted to just copy and paste code and not read it, it's available to you to do that, right? So I'm going to talk to the people that are maybe not as familiar with coding or still learning Python. I highly recommend learning Python, learning what is a print statement, what's an if statement, what is a loop, and learning those basics. Obviously, at a hackathon, you don't have time to do all of that. So I think a little bit, it depends on the context, right? A little bit can be forgiven at something like a hackathon where you're literally learning as you're doing it. In that case, I would recommend using the AI. If you're using AI, generate the code and then ask questions about the code until you understand it. That's going to take a little bit longer, but it's not going to take nearly as long as you writing it all yourself, right? So make that small sacrifice in time to understand your code better, because then when something goes wrong, you're better able to explain it. It takes a little bit of self-control, right? Because it's really tempting to just copy and paste code. One of the most common examples of this that I see is when ChatGPT will do something like, oh, you want to access your data, here you go. And then it says like data path equals, quote, path to your data. And people just copy and paste that and they're like, oh, it doesn't work. It says it can't find my file. That's because you had to change the file string. You had to change like the path to that. And you would know that if you had like read through it and tried to understand what each variable meant, right? Or at least had learned some basic Python principles beforehand. So, stuff like, and when you're writing a ton of code, something like that, one little small variable can really slip by you. So I highly recommend working with the AI if you want, trying to understand each portion of code. For more experienced coders, I think it's more of a productivity tool. So for me, I've written so many functions, so many if statements and try except statements that I really don't need that practice anymore. And it just speeds things up for me to move on with other projects or other portions of my project. So for more experienced coders, it's more of a utility tool. And hopefully the code that it generates is what you were already going to write yourself. So even with experienced coders, double check that it is what you expected it to be. I hope that answered your question. I'm curious what if other people have experience with this, maybe getting incorrect code or just getting even more confused by using AI if you didn't have as much experience.
Yeah, I had a question.
So I've used it really helpfully, especially like tasks where I'm translating R code to Python code. Not as good of a Python coder. It definitely gives me a head start, like on tasks like that. Mixed success on doing things kind of like in what you did in the tutorial or a more complex thing, unless I know pretty well, kind of like I'm going to have to debug, I'm going to have to look at the code and guess, no, I don't want to use that package. So a little bit for me, it's been mixed. One thing that I use it a lot for, and it saves so much time, is writing my documentation headers. So I'll have functions and I'm like, here's the function, please write a R oxygen header for this. And it can do amazingly well. I've even had it say, please write a description of the function and what it does and some examples, and have been at times shocked at how well it's able to read the code and kind of, it feels like make kind of leaps of like understanding about the context of what I'm doing.
I've had a ton of success with having it translate data structures between JavaScript and Python, and especially for like JSON APIs. When it's some crazy nested thing and you need to dig data out of it, it'd be nice to create an actual object model to hold that, drop the chunk of JSON that the API gives you back into ChatGPT. Please give me a pydantic model, and it's rather good at that.
For someone who's learning coding, you could paste it a chunk of code and have it explain it to you. You can also have it annotate code and it'll pop out like comments for pretty much every single line of code and what it does. So that could be really helpful when you're learning code.
Yeah. And say what level it would like it to explain to. Where are you at with programming? Explain it for a beginner versus explain it for an advanced programmer.
Yeah, these are all really great points. I love the like commenting code for you and explaining code for you. You can really, I think sometimes people, we have two extremes, right? Some people are like, oh, it's a person, I'm going to talk to it like a, well, it's not a person, it's not thinking like a person, right? And then the other extreme is, oh, it's a computer, it doesn't understand what I mean. But we're kind of in this middle ground where you can really talk to it like a person and say, hey, I don't understand what in the world you are talking about here. What does this line of code mean? What does this mean? You can really have a conversation with it and say, hey, go back and annotate all of this for me. It's like a little person sitting, like a little assistant sitting next to you that's sometimes a little crazy, but most of the time you can guide it in the right direction.
Probably the favorite thing that I learned or heard for like understanding how LLMs work is that we've made computers that are really, really good at doing math and looking things up. We finally taught it a little bit about language and it forgot all that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to think about that again.
I guess I'll just triple down on the it's great for learning. As I transitioned into a Python world from R, it can be great to be like, can you explain this? What is this function doing? Like if I'm using code that I don't understand. It's also great when you've written a big chunk and you're like, can you make this into a function? And it will crunch it down and digest it and skip the steps that I built up over time that aren't really necessary anymore. It's also really great at reject strings, which I find very, very useful to use, but I don't understand them at all. And so I'm like, here's a string, I want to extract this from it, and it will spew out the gibberish and rejects that will make that work.
Yeah, I don't think anyone knows regex off the top of their head. If you do, you deserve a medal. I look it up every single time. I've learned it countless times.
The regex also allow using it for date times. All of you know how much time one can spend just getting the date time in the right format. I didn't really do it, so I don't want to think about it. Just figure it out. But of course, checking. I think checking for date time, especially double checking the time zone and things like that. But asking you to get the right format would be very fine. Right.
I actually like want to ask another question. So it's come up like because like ESL, so like I use ChatGPT to also like look at my grammar and stuff. So like when we do analysis of R and stuff, like we cite the packages. So where do we stand on like citing the AI tools that we're using?
Yeah, that's
For that.
right. And I think it's a great question because there is question into where does this AI get its information, like mostly the internet. Does the AI even attribute where it got its information? Most of the time, no. It's a closed model. They don't exactly say what, or some models say exactly what data they trained on. Other models do not. I think it's been widely accepted to cite the model that you use, or at least acknowledge that your code or whatever you made was partially generated by AI. I think that's great for transparency anyway. it gets a little funny when you talk about citing stuff like that, because I think even last year, you've probably met Felipe, maybe not, he's on the organizing committee here as well for Ocean Hack Week. He writes a lot of Python packages, a lot of packages in general, and I think we were messing around with AI, and there was a package that he specifically worked on, and he pointed at the code that AI generated, and he said, "That's my code," and it even like had his comments in it, like written by him. And he was like, that's mine, that it stole it from me. And I thought that was hilarious. That, so you really have to see like where it's getting its information from. And when it's something very specific too, like I said, it's just generating the next word, but in the case of a very specific package, it if that's the only examples of it, that's the only examples of it that it's seen, right? So then the probability of it generating exactly what's on that package documentation is very high. Anyway, just an interesting tidbit also related to our Ocean Hack Week team. But yeah, I do recommend citing that you did use an AI assistant or AI generated. I know there's probably there are lawsuits and probably will be even more lawsuits that will decide the official legislation for that. Interested if anyone else has thoughts though.
One thought is, I mean, we know that right now ChatGPT violates licenses. Like, for example, if we do this, give me something, and it's gonna give you some examples, and those come from a repo that the repo itself has a license, which the license can be open, but the license can be, for example, please credit the author of this repo. And I think Felipe's example might have been exactly one of those, that he had a license which required to credit the author, and the AI didn't credit the author to spit it out. So one kind of, well, let's not get into all the like kind of low business, but how can we maybe address this is to first try to, I think it's a little bit on us at this point because they don't care. So maybe we first, if we get something, we ask, could you provide me some kind of where you get this from? Where did you get this from? For example, for the project, if we're looking for SST for prediction, I remember there was an OceanHackWeek project which was doing that. Maybe that's what it's pulling from. Maybe it's pulling from the Outbox project. So it's our job to go and like ask and figure out if we can get that source. And maybe the ChatGPT will tell us the link. And I've heard also sometimes give you wrong links, but then maybe we have to go and check them. And then we have to go and read the license, understand the license, and at least understand if we need to credit these people or not. I don't know, that's my view.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on that real quick, of ChatGPT not crediting things. One, so there is a reason for that in the way that it's trained. So ChatGPT is not actually going back and looking through documentation and then giving you the answer. ChatGPT, like I said, is predicting the next word. When you're working on something probabilistically like that, it's not actually retrieving information, it's generating it. And so it has no way to know where that came from. We have no way to know where that came from, what it was trained on to be able to generate that. So it's impossible for it to say this came from that, unless they add some sort of like extra training on top of it to train it to cite its sources, but that would take, a whole new model. So it's impossible for it to say, I got this from this. So if you're using a specific package, like Valentina was saying, I think that's Valentina talking, to try to see into that, look at that package's documentation, see if there's licenses with it. This is another reason I really love Perplexity AI. It's not that great at writing code, but it's really great for giving you sources. I love it because it gives you all of the sources that it used to get that information, because it is a search engine. It is looking through a database and then pulling information back and showing it to you. So that's really great if you want to say, hey, do I need to attribute this to anyone? What are the rules around using this package? What does this license mean? It's going to be really good about that and also give you sources on where it found this information. So just a little bit of difference between like the models and why, you know, it's kind of built into their training to just have the information and not be able to tell you where it got it.
Bill having his code regurgitated at us caused a good bit of consternation about licenses and what is the default license we're going to recommend for your projects. I don't think we still have a solid answer, but if you want to chat with that about that further, what different licenses mean, we can have that discussion as well.
Just a note, I threw in a license in the template just so that people have something to get started. So if you contact people, you already have a license, but that's not the right way to do it. The right way is as a team, you decide what your license is. And license I use MIT. And it's interesting because that's something we kind of like as a community, but at the same time now with ChatGPT, it's a question whether the MIT license is a good one because that allows somebody to scrape your work and not credit you. So there may be some others may have suggestions for licenses that don't allow bots taking your work. So open question.
I wanted to plug a tool that some of my friends are working on. It's called, the company's called OceanHackWeek, and they make a product called Vibe Check. It's made in Maine, and it uses LLMs to analyze terms of service and licenses for you based on your like a profile of your sort of risk appetite and values and ethics. And so it's an ethical AI company dealing with some of the unethical practices of other AI companies. And so it's a fun way to use sort of the tooling against the other tooling. So that's, I think they still have a free version.
You drop
Yeah,
that.
eventually we're just gonna get all our AI lawyers and have all the AI lawyers talk to the other AI lawyers. Like, I mean, AI, like robot lawyers. We're just gonna have them all talk and then tell us their decision.
I spent a lot of time thinking about licenses. I'm in a federal agency and I'm on the part of the team that is making decisions about open source software policies for NOAA. And one of the take home, so I'm in a federal agency, we're required to release everything on a very permissive open license, like the most permissive possible. One of my take homes from all these discussions over the last year is that if you are working on a code project, like you're starting your GitHub repo, like this is another reason why having it in a repo is so great, because right from the get-go, you can specify a license. You can change that later, but I think what's really important is that before you start committing code, you have the license there, so everybody on the team is kind of on the same page. It is hard if you're going to be working on something and it's part of somebody's thesis, say, or like maybe they're developing something and they would like to use this commercially. You know, people do that. You work for a contractor and you don't want to make your code open because you're going to be kind of selling it. But have that, at least think a little bit about that and have that license in there from the get-go. So everybody's kind of on this, a little bit on the same page. So that's one thing, that big take home for me, especially if you ever end up being a contractor for a federal agency, don't work on anything that doesn't have a license in there for your own protection. Oh, right. The other interesting thing is how if you're working on a big code project, pull requests are actually really important. GitHub has this fantastic features to keep track of contributions. And if you do things with a branch, and then every time you complete that task and do a pull request, GitHub will, there's just a button you can click, and it will show everyone's pull request. It is so easy to keep track of a big project. I have a bad habit of always pushing the main. This is bad. I'm trying to change that.
Okay, we got 2 minutes left. Any new voices, any new questions? Put this out before we go back to the that's going on. Help people.
Back to you said the voices and sorry.
I think, Myranda, you're gonna be around online, so accessible. and
Yes.
To do discussion.
Yes, feel free to reach out to me on Slack, or I'll probably also be silently on these Zoom calls. So yeah, reach out to me. I'd love to talk more.
We've got a